I'd like to talk to you for once about film directing. I talk a lot about acting and what's helpful to actors, and from the perspective of a director, and also sometimes from the little experience I have acting myself. In any case, today I'd like to talk about directing because I feel like even though I'd like to hope this is just the beginning, yet Yet I have been doing it for some time, and I wish I would have found some of this advice information when I was 18, just starting film school. So, yes, I decided to make this a longer video and just talk about my insight about directing. So, and disclaimer, directing, of course, as any practice of the arts, is subjective. Subjective. Oh, actually, on the subject of subjective, I was recently asked at a workshop by one of my students. He asked me a brilliant question. He said, "How can you have standards in art, in cinema? Well, what is the standard in cinema? While at the same time we constantly say that art is subjective. So how can you even teach it?" And I say that is a great question that I think is a wonderful starting point, because indeed there are standards, right? There are technical, let's say, elements. There are certainly guidelines, right? Rather than rules, guidelines that if you follow them, you are more likely than not to have a great film at the outcome. And yet, they are, and this is very important, they are guidelines. They are not strict rules. Because, in fact, if you follow all of them exactly, you will end up with something quite boring. So where do you draw the line? And you draw the line where your intuition tells you to draw it, right? So one of the things we do have to practice as artists is listen to our intuition, and that is certainly a rule that yeah, you can't make it really as an artist unless you follow your intuition. Still, there are guidelines, and we can call them rules, and we can say, well, you know, before you break the rules, you have to know the rules. And of course, for easier comprehension, they are expressed as, let's say, maxims. Um, because if and every rule has an exception, and if you would start with exceptions, you would never finish. So just to make it more compact, concise, and just accessible to people who are new, these guidelines are expressed in the form of rules or maxims, and um, given in their shortest form. For example, like um, the first thing that comes to mind is the three-act structure, right? We say, well, all films follow three-act structure. Is that exactly true? No. There are, of course, exceptions. I mean, Andy Warhol made films, so, and people watched them. Yeah. And yet, still, for the most part, it is very important that you are familiar with these guidelines. And then you have the selection of tools that you can choose from. Which ones are you going to follow? So, would you like to follow this React structure? Well, it's you put yourself in a better position as a director, as a writer, as an author, if you are familiar with what is the three-act structure, or what is the white balance, for example, or I don't know, the rules of harmony in music, whatever. Or how you write dialogue, or how you yeah how I don't know how Stanislavski said that actors should act. yeah, well, we'll get into the what I consider rather essential to understand guidelines. Um, but in any case, I feel like to go back to the subject of subjective and objective and the standards in art, and specifically in cinema, because obviously, I mean, my my main field is cinema. Um, so yes, there are certain guidelines, and clearly, knowing them, being familiar with them, and being directional and intentional about following some of them will give you a higher probability of more people going to see your film, right? So let's put it this way. um, film Filmmaking is a quite a specific art form, but I think it's going to change now with obviously, you know, with technology being more accessible, and with all the developments in the AI, maybe we'll get, you know, conceptual cinema, like we got conceptual art. Because up until recently, filmmaking has been very expensive. As much as you know, painting used to be very expensive, sculpting used to be very expensive. Today, painting is not expensive. Back in the day, like to get blue paint, you would have to, I don't know, travel on a horse to Venice or something. This is not accurate information, but this is just to give you an idea. Like you wouldn't be able to buy certain paints in certain cities, and you would have to go to a different city or find a specific merchant that only comes on a ship, you know, once every few months. And yeah, painting was not an accessible art form back in the day, and you couldn't, like, you know, you couldn't have a projection, or like, you know, not everybody could afford camera obscura. Yeah, and they didn't. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not. This is not. This is not the point. The point is that today, where I feel like at a breaking point of cinema, because it's going to undergo the same change that the fine arts, fine art, fine art, fine art have. Because it's becoming cheaper and cheaper, and up until now it's been very expensive, and that had defined it in many ways. So like you would have to get your film more likable. Why? Because to make the money back on your film, you would need a lot of people to have paid for it. So you would be interested in many people having watched it, because it was, still is, an expensive art form. So to have the money back, you would have to kind of like have a lot of people vote for it with their wallets, and otherwise it didn't really make sense to make that film. I mean, unless you were rich, and then you just yeah, you just do it because you can. But I'm not talking about people spending money. I'm talking about like filmmaking as a job where you do it for other people and you get money from them. So for the service you offer to them. So like in this, in the case of cinema, I guess it's, yeah, it is entertainment. It is also beauty. It is also escapism. Maybe, and an art, of course, yes, and an intellectual pleasure. So either way, to go back to the standards and objectivity and subjectivity, if you were to follow a certain amount of these guidelines as to what a good film is, you would be more likely, in terms of probability, to have people voting with their wallet for your film and to have the money back, and to be able to to basically get people to watch your film or want to watch your film. And then it would kind of, yeah, justify why you made it. And yet, of course, in Europe it's quite special with filmmaking, because there are two types of cinemas. mostly, I guess, anything that can be like art and entertainment. And in one case, certain certain pieces, art pieces, they have to be made even if the majority of people would not enjoy or even be able to understand them. And this is where you have these public funds that give money to filmmaking that isn't necessarily appreciated by the majority of people, but because these films have to exist because they touch on important like social topics, political topics, even if they are not, or maybe they, just for pure sense of creating beauty and multiplying beauty in the world, these films have to be created. And then usually they're, either publicly funded with no expectation that the film will make the money back, or occasionally even privately funded by some people with a great appreciation of the arts. Uh, or else you have commercial filmmaking that relies on the film making the money back and people voting with their wallet for this film. Or now with the streaming platforms, with like their time spent watching it, with their attention, maybe, because that's another important currency today. So that is why in filmmaking it is important to be aware of these guidelines that are not fully objective, but they are expressed in the form of, so to say, rules, so they at least are direct and clear and clearly understood. And then you choose to follow some of them, and you ask your intuition, what do I want to follow from the different guidelines I know, and what do I choose to ignore, to break, or to where do I choose to experiment. Well, I hope this helps in some way to understand the objectivity and subjectivity in arts and specifically in filmmaking. Yes, I guess I'm gonna make separate video more on directing once we got this out of the way. So yeah, watch the next video for more information about film directing and the kind of information I wish I would have had when I started film school when I was 18.